Well, let's move on now because we have more proof Mr Bowen is the most dangerous minister in Albanese's cabinet and a clown at the same time. The Australian reports the Energy Minister weaponised the public service by instructing his department to produce entirely flawed figures to allege Peter Dutton's nuclear energy plan would see a 49% electricity shortfall by 2035. The Department of Climate Change and Energy now says what it did was not an analysis of the coalition's nuclear energy proposals, but an assumption-driven calculation. And yet, Labor still put out this campaign.
There are significantly increased rates of cancer, heart attacks and strokes amongst the workforce in the nuclear industries. This research has looked at over 300,000 workers over 30 years, and it's very clear that working with radiation has no safe lower limit.
Joining me now is Liberal MP Garth Hamilton. Garth, good to see you. I mean, the figures were clearly dreamed up. They were drummed up by the department, and Mr Bowen deliberately lied to the Australian public.
These are very, very serious allegations against Mr Bowen. He's broken faith with the Australian people while being a Minister of the Crown. That's not something we expect. We often hear in conversation in Australia about how people have lost faith or lost confidence in politicians and politics. This is why. This is exactly why, because of people like Mr Bowen who willfully, deliberately have misled the Australian public purely for the political purposes of the Labor Party. This is a gross misuse of his position. I think the first thing he should do is come clean. Secondly, he should apologise to the Australian people. I think beyond that, his tenure in that role must be coming to a close.
Well, surely it has to. I mean, clearly he can't even get the basic arithmetic right. I mean, it's just astounding that the Australian public are not being allowed to make up their minds on what sort of energy they want to keep the lights on in this country when you've got this drummed up figure.
And yet, these were the people who wanted, not once but twice, to bring a misinformation bill into the parliament to stop people from arguing against them. And now we find out that they were cooking the books at the same time. This is completely uncharted territory for us.
Yeah, it's a complete sham, isn't it? Now, look, opposition leader Peter Dutton will hold his first campaign-style rally in Melbourne on Sunday. And as we know, this follows Albo's quasi-election campaign across the country this week where he's been splashing the cash. But Garth, does this suggest that the coalition is actually anticipating an early election? I mean, if Peter Dutton is also holding a campaign rally so early, are you preparing to go early?
Well, look, we must always be prepared. First-term governments do have a history of going early. I still don't think this election will be called until after the Western Australian election is my tip. But I would say this, if the Prime Minister does go early, he still has to answer to the Australian people what his plan is for Australia. I mean, he's walking into an election season now, throwing money about and throwing insults at Peter Dutton. That's about it. We don't know what his plan is. Are we going to see a continuation of this, fence sitting when it comes to Australia Day? Do we support Israel? Are we going to keep spending? Are we going to increase taxes? What's his plan? He hasn't made those things clear. He hasn't laid out any agenda for a second term. It's getting a bit late in the day for that.
Well, it is. We've still got a couple of months to go, but I mean, Australians need to make up their minds in the end. Now, I want to talk to you about AUKUS because there seems to be bipartisan support for AUKUS leading into a new Donald Trump era. And this comes as Democratic and Republican congressmen say that the AUKUS Security Pact is a model for how the US should engage with allies and that its domestic political support is growing. What do you think this means for Australia, Garth?
Well, first up, I think it means that we're lucky that Scott Morrison, when he was Prime Minister, had the foresight to engage in the AUKUS agreement. And we're lucky that Peter Dutton, as the Defence Minister at the time, was involved as well, so that we can carry on that tradition. This was a great step forward for us. It's good to remember that it wasn't that long ago Don Farrell, the Minister for Trade, said he wasn't sure if the US was our closest ally. So we've got a Labor Party who I don't think would have made this agreement. And that's been clear in their positions around how they see our place in the world and who they think our allies are. We're lucky that we're on that right foot. The question is now, how do we double down on this? How do we secure the relationship and the goodwill that we've secured through AUKUS? Prime Minister this week was trying to tell us that he's best placed to deal with Donald Trump. The Prime Minister struggles to negotiate with Adam Bandt. I think Donald Trump would run straight over the top of him. I'm pretty clear that Peter Dutton would be best placed to deal with Donald Trump. in a future government.
Yes, I did have a laugh at that story that came out yesterday, Garth, when Albanese said he's best placed given his links in the Pacific. I'm pretty sure that if Donald Trump wanted to engage with leaders in the Pacific, I don't think that he'll be getting on the phone to Anthony Albanese anytime soon and saying, please, can you introduce me to people? I mean, it's just a preposterous suggestion. Now, look, before we let you go, Anthony Albanese says he will serve a full term as Prime Minister if he's re-elected. But Garth, look, the polls are bad. He's not doing too good. Could the Labor Party move to punt him eventually?
The Labor Party is a mysterious beast. I would say this, though, I don't think he's in charge as Prime Minister now. And if he does secure a second term, it will be in minority government. And he won't be in charge. It'll be Adam Bandt, the Greens and the Teals who'll be in charge. And we've seen that sort of chaos before in the Gillard government. And we can expect exactly the same if that's a minority government for this Labor Party coming forward. I think that's a terrible proposition for Australia. Labor has been at odds and ends all through this term trying to work out what it is they want to do. Do they still commit to voice treaty truth? What position they hold on things like Australia Day? They're all at sea. The chaos of minority government would ensure that Mr Albanese, I don't think, would have a very strong hand on the wheel should he secure his prime ministership.
No, well, we saw that during the Gillard years, and we certainly don't want to go back to that sort of minority government. Garth Hamilton, nice to chat to you. Thank you very much for joining me on the show this evening.